We are live at the 117th NAACP National Convention. And I want to say, welcome to Sunday Civics, the home for the civically engaged. I am so delighted to be able to bring this conversation live during the NAACP convention. We are competing with music and food, but that's okay. I see some folks, you grabbed your food and you came on over, and I appreciate you. We are going to have a really good conversation. I have a really dear friend, Rashad Robinson, who previously you may have known him as the lead, the face, the organizer, the face of Color of Change and building and organizing in this digital world that we are in now. So he was at the beginning and leading a national organization in response to what we all do every day, which is seeking justice for our communities and our people. And there's a reason why he and I are friends. While we started off as baby organizers, because, as you know, some of you have been listening to Sunday Civics and you've heard my Porch Light series, right? Talking about leaving the light on for democracy. Now, at the same time, ain't that good? Because over at Rashad's house, God gave a different message to Rashad in talking about what we need to do, but seemingly it all fits together, which means that this must be the move. This must be the story of organizers who know each other, but didn't talk in detail about what we were thinking and praying over and doing it over and over, and we would both come up with the same vision forward. So I want to bring to the front of the Sunday Civics class, June, one of my dear friends, known when we started off as baby organizers in the movement, but also because he started his career in the NAACP, and he was supposed to be here. He was looking forward to being here in person, but of all of the delays and the cancellations that happened. Otherwise, he would be right here with us. And so welcome to the Sunday Civics class, Rashad Robinson.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for that, Eljoy. It is so good to be with you all virtually and to feel the love through the technology. I really wish I could be there in Chicago. When I was scrambling last night when they canceled all my flights and told me they wouldn't be able to get me there till Monday. But I'm glad that we found another way for us to be in dialogue, and this conversation just is so timely and could not wait. So thank you, Eljoy, for having me on Sunday Civics, and thank you all, NAACP, for what you're doing every single day.
Now, Rashad, you've been to the front of the class before. We've talked about your first civic action. We've talked about your history with Dr. Hazel Dukes in the NAACP, but I want you to remind folks here about your history with the NAACP and particularly Dr. Dukes.
Yeah, so I grew up on Eastern Long Island, so the last exit on the Long Island Expressway. My family got there in the 20s and the 30s through the Great Migration. So there are some Black folks out there. Shout out if there's any Eastern Long Island NAACP people around, or Long Island NAACP folks, because we are out there and we're strong. And I grew up in Riverhead, Long Island, and I actually talk in the opening of my book about one of the sort of first moments of injustice that I sort of really remember, which was in middle school, like this moment where young, high schoolers were sent to be served in a lineup, taken out of high school without their parents' permission, and put into a police lineup, and it became a big issue in the town. And the Eastern Long Island NAACP, which my parents are lifetime members of, which I'm a lifetime member of. And the NAACP responded along with the local churches. And I got to see in action that first engagement. It so many ways led me on a journey about what power could look like, what it meant to bring people together. And over the next several years, I would get my feet wet in local organizing. Because when you grow up in a place like Eastern Long Island, you got to fight for everything as Black folks. You got to fight to make sure you get someone on the school board, or that the town is treating your areas and your neighborhoods fairly and equitably. And my family is still out there. And what's interesting about my growing up was that I just dug in and I became involved in the local NAACP chapter. I led my first protest in high school that was on the cover of Newsday and got, local ABC and NBC affiliates covering it. And it caught the notice of the New York NAACP. And Kwesi Afume, who was president at the time, so I'm aging myself a bit, and Hazel Dukes, who was leading the New York chapter, came to Long Island and gave me sort of an award for that. It was a moment that sort of recognized the work that I was doing, but also encouraged me to keep going. I was 17 years old at the time, and it was one of those moments along my journey where the NAACP and the power of infrastructure, the power of community has helped guide me and bring me to this place. And so as I present this book to the world, which is a framework for how we think about power and social change in this moment, how we recognize what we've been losing and kind of change course. I am always encouraged by what I have learned along the way by everyday people that I got to know in the NAACP who had this culture of belief. And y'all know what I mean by culture of belief. It's that thing in your stomach or in your body. It's that faith that you believe something is better for yourself and your family and your community, even if you can't touch it, even if you haven't always experienced it, but something is better. And that culture of belief is what drives so many of us to fight for something more. And that culture of belief is part of why I do this work. And it's part of what I think is critical, connected to all the strategies that I talk about in the book.
Well, Rashad, I had an opportunity to read the book, and it's you all should make sure to get your copy as well. And it's a good deep dive, gut check as you talk about power, but then also in evaluating the work that we are doing on a daily basis. Quite often, when we are in the struggle and the battle on an everyday, ongoing basis, we feel like we don't have the luxury to step back and really think critically about our values, about the direction that we are going. And in your first chapter, and if you don't know, of the book is called "Presence is Not Enough." And if I was able to be tech savvy at the same time, and Rashad, I have to send you this slide. I did a presentation to Black New York elected officials, where on the slide I have "representation is not enough."
Yep.
See, right? But we've been conditioned to celebrate the representation because we have been, fighting for representation in different spaces. But you argue that it's insufficient alone. And so can you talk about what you mean as you set that up in the beginning of the book?
Yeah. So the whole framework is that the book is called From Presence to Power. Presence is not a bad thing. We do want to build presence, visibility, awareness, followers, all the things that can make us feel like people are engaged. Presence can, give us the type of energy and awareness behind the issues that we care about. But power is the ability to change the rules. And in this attention economy, we can mistake presence for power. So when we mistake presence for power, what ends up happening is that we can sometimes think, like, for instance, a Black president means that we're post-racial. And we know that a Black president is not post-racial, but presence can make us and can sometimes trick people into thinking that it comes along with powers that it doesn't. Sometimes our celebrities who gain a lot of attention and awareness in the world, right, can stop the internet when they announce they're pregnant, right? America can love, celebrate, and monetize Black culture and hate Black people at the same time. And so I say that to say that mistaking presence for power is one of those central things that gets us caught up in a way that puts us on the wrong path. And so I really talk about that difference. And I talk about it through the lens of Hurricane Katrina, which was a flood that was caused by bad decision makers that turned into a life-altering disaster by bad decision makers. It happened, and people talked about Hurricane Katrina as this natural disaster, but it wasn't natural. It was caused by people, right? And the most present words during that moment of Katrina were basically the words that were said by Kanye West, the old Kanye West, when he said George Bush doesn't care about Black people. That was very present. It was very visible. We had a lot of awareness about what was happening in the Gulf Coast. But while that presence was happening, there was some power happening. Behind the scenes, then Congressman Mike Pence, before he became vice president, years before, was inside of the Heritage Foundation 20 years before they wrote Project 2025. 20 years before. And what they were doing after the levees broke was they were carving up New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. They were privatizing it. They were making it impossible for people to return. They were stealing people's homes. They were changing the context for what the path forward would look like. And so when I talk about the difference between presence and power, I want us to be aware of the work that we have to do to build presence, of course, but how we have to recognize our role in translating that into the power that actually changes the rules.
Rashad, I think it's really, really important to talk about what power is. Because as you mentioned, we are conditioned, right? Not only the representation, but the word power, we like putting forth as sometimes a magic spell. We just say Black power, right? And then that's supposed to automatically do something. But what does that actually mean? And you spent some time defining that. Can you talk a bit about that? Yeah,
I really talk about it in the book because I think, sometimes people have misconceived notions about it. Sometimes we're a little afraid of it. We know the people sometimes that have a lot of power and what they do with it. And we can sometimes have misunderstandings of power. But when I talk about power, it's about forcing decision makers to do things for our community that they don't want to do. When I think about back to the Hurricane Katrina example, right, I talk about it as a flood that was caused by bad decision makers. And so many of us probably remember those images or remember directly being there of Black folks on their roofs begging for the government to do something and being left to die. And right, Katrina illustrated a lot of things. COVID illustrates a lot of things. What's currently happening in this Trump era of authoritarianism illustrates a lot of things that we already knew about inequality and justice. But at the heart of it, no one was nervous about disappointing Black people. And if you're not nervous about disappointing our community, then it doesn't matter what kind of research report you have. It doesn't matter what kind of facts and figures you have. That comes down to power. And that's why I talk about power so much, because I do think it's about being able to force corporations to do things that they don't want to otherwise do, to force those elected officials to make decisions in our favor. And that requires infrastructure. It requires us bringing people together. It requires organizations like the NAACP and others. But always it requires us putting our energy and our focus in the right places. So throughout the book, what I've really done is at the end of many of the chapters, I've created exercises because I want this to be accessible and usable for all of you as you go back into your communities and you think about, how do I take on these local fights? Maybe a book ban in the library, maybe something that's happening at the school, maybe a data center that I don't want to happen there. And so I wrote these exercises that you can take out and do in your chapters. And so it's called Find Your Power, and there's 9 of them. And these Find Your Power are about finding your power as an individual in the singular. How do I find my power? How do I find the resources and the networks? How do I find the things that I have at my disposal that can be useful? And then also, how do I find my power in the plural? How do I find my connections to the people and the communities and the resources that I have? And both of those things are critically important because we all have to find our power in this moment if we're going to build enough energy to actually have the type of power, Joy, that we're talking about.
Definitely. And just before we continue that, because I want to stay on power just a little bit more, I do want to give a shout out to the Nubia family who are also watching and who will also, I'm sure, be gobbling up your book as well. And I love that you include actions for people to take at the end of the chapters, because this is also something diagnosed in our just overall engagement is people believe in set it and forget it democracy. That I voted, I went home, and then it's somebody ought to do something. And why ain't nobody doing anything? And this what they do to us, right? Like as if there is no part to play in the management of your communities and the management of the democracy overall. And so I do want you to spend a little bit more time talking about the exercises and the thought process about them.
So, right, I've read a lot of books where people give great ideas and great background on what we should do and how we should do it. But you're oftentimes left like, well, okay, then how do I apply this? And I wanted to unlock that. Your point around voting is so critically important. I oftentimes talk about voting in an exercise analogy. It's sort of like the stretching of civic engagement, right? If stretching is not gonna get you everywhere you want to go, but if you don't stretch, you're gonna hurt later. And so you need to stretch, but you also have to do all the other things along the way if you want to be as healthy as possible. And I think that that's really important. Elections are about finding the people that we can fight with. Finding the people we put in office that we can do, that we can push and get the most out of, the people that we're going to wrestle with around ideas. So that does mean that we've got to turn out and vote. But then it means that we have to do all the other things around accountability, because after the election is when the good part happens. It's when we actually get to delivering on the things that make our lives better. And we stand up and we protect the people who have actually delivered, and we take out those people that haven't. That is all part of the civic engagement loop. Our opponents, those that stand in the way of the things that we care about, they are in a never-ending war. We got the Voting Rights Act, we got many other progress, and they built infrastructure to wait it out decades to just come back and take it away. So how, Joy, sometimes we hear people on our side say, when we win, all these things will happen. When we win, probably many of you have heard, when we win, these things will happen. Well, our opponents never say when we win, because they're always fighting. They're always showing up. They've made this a participation sport. They wear their red caps. They go into the gym and they turn on right-wing conservative media. They make it part of their lifestyle. And we've got to show up in a way that we know that we are going to be in a constant battle for our families, for our communities, for ourselves. And that means that the people on the other side are never going to give up. They're never going to give up. And if we know that, then we can show up differently. Because, it's really bad to be in a battle with someone if you think the war is over and they don't. You think you've passed this legislation and they're just waiting for the moment that they can dismantle all of it. And that's what we know is happening. But we also know that we are fighting for something bigger, something bolder. And to go back to that culture of belief that something better is possible, we just have to arm ourselves with a different philosophy around how we take on these fights and how we engage them. And that's what this book is really about. This book is about giving us a 21st century framework in this era of big tech. And I tell stories about taking on Facebook and taking on right-wing organizations. I tell stories about the wins and the losses along the way, because I think the losses are so important and so instructive to really helping us understand what we do next. But all of those things are really critically important for us in this era, where we're seeing rollbacks to so much of the things our ancestors, so much of the things our legends, so many of the things that we ourselves have fought for and won. And we've got to know that the strategies that got us into this are not going to be the strategies that get us out. And that's really the offering, the exercises, the ideas, and the frameworks. It's a 21st century framework for how we win. And if you all are tired of losing and you want to win, this is the book for you. It goes on sale July 28th. So you all, if you order it now, you'll be among the first people to get it. And I'm going to be heading out, Joy, on a tour, and I'm heading into cities all around the country. If people go to frompresencetopower.com, they can follow it. But I've got events with folks like Joyanne Reed. I've got events with folks like Jane Fonda and Lena Waithe and Angela Rye. And I know you and I are going to be doing something in New York sometime soon in the fall. But I want all of these folks to be engaged in different cities, because I just think we are in this moment where, yes, we are losing some things, but that means we are at the start of winning some things.
I love that. And yes, definitely, I'm one of your biggest cheerleaders, as you know. And just before I do have a closing question, but before I get there, I want to talk about that infrastructure point that you mentioned, because I think that's really, really important to talk about, particularly with an organization like NAACP. Yeah. And as I've come into leadership of the state conference, and I've looked at, if we're talking about what is the infrastructure that exists in our communities, right? What is the economic infrastructure? What is the education infrastructure? It's not by accident that all of our infrastructure is being attacked, even down to the level of the infrastructure of our organizations and churches. The diaspora wars that happen on social media, the attacks on people, information on people denouncing and coming out of fraternities and sororities. That is all dismantling our infrastructure in our community. And so when you talk about the other side, right, building and maintaining infrastructure, even when they have losses on the end, you know, I imagine we agree on the same thing, that we need to be investing and doubling down as much as possible in our infrastructure. Now, there are some toxic things we need to let go, maybe, but that doesn't mean we throw it all out and not have the infrastructure we need to continue as a community.
Well, you know, there's sometimes these stories that get told about big wins, that it's just like one person made a speech or a few people marched, and they don't get into the behind the scenes of how it all actually happened. All of the aunties who got behind, and the grandmas and the deaconess, all of the folks who put together the events. The stories of the infrastructure is the stories of relationships. It's the stories of money and resources. It's the story of independent media, local newspapers, and Black radio. And all of these things are under attack right now because they're not just trying to beat us on policy. What they're trying to do is make it impossible for us to fight for a better tomorrow. And so we do have to maintain our independent infrastructure. It's why our organizations are so incredibly important. And we have to continue to modernize and update it. One quick story I'll just tell about infrastructure, which I just think is my favorite story about infrastructure and reminds us in this era of likes and retweets and social media that we have to keep our relationships, is that there at the Prince Hall Masonic Lodge in Atlanta back in the 60s. If you know, you know. Both my grandfathers were Prince Hall Masons. And the Prince Hall Masons, in their Auburn Avenue office, they had two tenants. Up above on the second floor was the first Black-owned radio station. And below that was the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King's office. The sort of one of the most pioneering sort of examples of Black infrastructure, of taking disconnected churches and religious leaders and getting them aligned so that they could become bigger than the sum of their individual parts. But Dr. King's office was below the radio station. And the story goes that when he wanted to talk directly to the community, he would take a broomstick and tap on the ceiling, and they would slide the microphone out the window down. And he would get to talk unfiltered in a way that the other local media wouldn't allow him. He would get to speak directly to the community and give people the information that they needed. The power of infrastructure, of relationships, of how we relate to one another and use the tools of our time, it is part of our DNA as a community. And so we have to build and recognize that even while we may be building individual followerships on platforms, we have to find the right ways to be aligned with one another so that our voices carry much bigger and much stronger and much bolder. And we give people the pathways to be as powerful as possible. We cannot mistake our presence and visibility. We can't mistake the outrage for what's happening in Washington, D.C. and many of our states. We can't mistake the presence of that for the power to actually make the change. The power to make the change will come in us building the strategies necessary, giving our people the tools that they require, and every single day waking up believing that something more is possible. And that is sort of what I'm offering in this book, Joy. And in some ways, it's also just a love letter, right? To all of us, to Black folks, to people who love our communities, for anyone who's been targeted, exploited, and oppressed and wants to win something. And you and I, meeting in our very early 20s, doing this work together, that's also the power of infrastructure, those relationships. When I moved from DC to New York City to work and do work around felony disenfranchisement, and you were one of the first people I sat down with, and you helped me build a community and build relationships in this new city. All of those things are part of how we connect with one another and build. So, sister, I also just want to congratulate you on your sort of leadership at the NAACP, what you've been able to do, what you continue to build and grow. You are an example for all of us. And I hope that I hope folks are watching you and how you move and how you build relationships and community, because you are such an example to so many. And I hope that, we continue to find ways to make our individual work collectively bigger than the sum of its individual parts.
Thank you so much. I don't like public pronouncements of support.
But we actually need to say it, because I'm not just saying it because I think you're great, Joy. I'm saying it because I think that it's important that we point to examples of greatness so that folks have possibility models. And there are young people who will need possibility models of who they can be and where they can go. And you, L. Joy Williams, are that possibility model. So I would be just amiss if I didn't say that. So congratulations on this leadership journey you're on, but also thank you for taking it up as a New Yorker and as a lifetime member of the New York NAACP. We're lucky to have you.
Thank you so much. Now, I know you have to go, and we will be praying and thinking of you as you continue this book tour and talking to everyone and bringing up these issues. But right now you have the ear. You have the ear of NAACP leaders who are branch presidents, executive committee members, general members, some who are as you know, all of us are volunteers, including mine. Telling everybody I'm a full-time professional volunteer now, right? And I know you talk about this towards the end and in the exercises of the book about how you are pouring into those of us who are doing this work on a regular basis. But if you can speak to every NAACP member, every NAACP president, every NAACP volunteer who hold up this infrastructure in their respective communities, what do you, Rashad, want them to know and want to impart upon them? Not only after reading the book, but just in terms of going forward.
Well, I want them to, after they read the book, to share the book. I want them to hand it to another person and hand it to another young person. One of the things that we have on that the right wing or those who oppose our equality, they build a network to get their ideas out. And far too often, Black folks, you know, in our larger progressive movement, our larger movement for social change, don't get to be the strategist. Other folks get to be the strategist, and they make us the boots on the ground. I am trying to make a real clear attempt to say this is a book about strategy, not just a book about ideas. This is not my memoir. This is a book about how we win, how we take on profiteers, how we take on big tech. And I am taking on a role that is normally taken on by the white boys. And so my ask and my invitation is for the type of support that oftentimes doesn't come to us, doesn't come to our people. And so the most important time for getting a book out in the world is a pre-sale moment, is this moment before it gets out. It's how the publisher sees that enough people care about it, where it gets into bookstores, it gets into libraries, it gets into schools. So, you know, share this information about the book on your social media, tag me in it. When you read the book, write a review of it and share it with other people, because we need to move our ideas. And this book doing well will mean that other people like us will get to write books like this and get the opportunity to tell stories like this. And so there's an opportunity here to shift who gets to be the strategist in our movement. And so my ask of you all as the NAACP, as a child of the NAACP, is to say, you know, let's help these ideas get out there, not simply because they're my ideas, but because it'll allow more of us to be able to tell these stories, to be able to make these strategic interventions, and to do it from an unapologetic racial justice perspective. Because racial justice isn't just about the outcomes, it's about the strategy. And that is, I think, really the opportunity in this moment. And then for all of you in your local chapters, I'm going to be out on the road doing workshops, doing engagements. So hopefully I can come to where you all are at. And so go to FromPresencetoPower.com, FromPresencetoPower.com. And what we're going to be doing is trying to find ways to connect with all of local chapters. I'm already doing something with you, Joy, in New York, but I want to engage other places and other spaces all around the country. So please follow me on social media. Please get this book and share it, whether it's the audio book, the ebook, or the actual book. It comes out July 28th. So now is the time for the pre-orders. Get it from your local Black-owned bookstore if you can. But everything in this really matters. And your support will help more folks like us get out these ideas and help a new generation of strategists get to make the interventions that we need to make in this moment.
Rashad, thank you so very much for taking time to be with us this evening. Let's give a round of applause for Rashad Robinson. Good luck on the book tour.
Thank you, thank you.
And those of you who are New York NAACP, you'll see Rashad again in the fall. He will be with us, and he's going to be part of the crew kicking off our book engagement tour in the state conference. So thank you, Rashad, for your continued support, and I'm glad we were able to love on you before you hit the road.
Thank you, thank you.
All right, folks. How y'all doing out there? Thank you so very much for coming to be a part of this conversation. Now, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring Rashad to this conversation is, as I said, those of you who have been listening to Sunday Civics for the last couple of weeks, where we've been talking about my Porch Light series about leaving the light on democracy. And this, I want to explain, is not just leaving the light on for democracy itself. It's not just for America to exist, right? We're thinking about how do we want to collectively build a better society for us first, right? And then also being able to change our mindsets. And when we are really talking about taking control of our communities, to let go of the fear that somebody has to give you permission to do so. This is your community. This is those of you coming together collectively to decide what is best to move forward, right? And in this 250th year of this country, we have a prime example. Ain't nobody give them permission to, do Did you see all the documentaries and everything from people? Did anybody give them permission? In fact, the king was telling them to send troops over there to tell them to stop what they were doing, right? And so we have plenty of examples, and not just from the quote founding fathers, because it'd be interesting to see, to have the story of the founding of this country reframed as wealthy people being mad about taxes, and then ginning up people who had actual concerns, who were working class and poor people who were working under the wealthy people who had actual concerns, but the wealthy people used the actual concerns to point their actual concerns, not to the wealthy people, but to the king in order to. Is this not happening at the same time right now? Okay, so the common denominator is that people with wealth being able to use what is actually happening and actually of concern to working people, to poor people, to ethnic whites, to people of color, to women, to children, using that and then pointing and saying, you know who's responsible for that? The Mexicans. And you're like, yeah, no, I never thought about that. Right? All of a sudden, trans people in the bathroom is your concern. It was just like, but I thought it was my paycheck not being, I thought it was the health insurance not being covered, right? And time again through our history, you can see when people come together, when people of color come together, when women come together, when people come together to organize, here come the wealthy people to dismantle it because they know that they are the real culprit. Now, I want to transition because in this same vein, it is in that same tradition of how our culture is defined is to the reason why people are able to gin up a conversation as to blame someone else for the calamity that has happened. And we're going to use an example this evening for our second guest of how that happens even within our own community. Now, raise your hand if you were raised by a Black single mother, if you are a Black single mother, if you know Black single mothers, if you love Black single mothers. Oh, okay, that should be everybody's hand, right? Well, I have another dear friend. I have a lot of brilliant friends, y'all. Well, I have another dear friend who wrote another book that should be on your bookshelf. And it is called Black Single Mother. And the author of the book is the beautiful, the talented, the very vocal Jamilah Lemieux. Welcome to the front of the Sunday Civics class. How are you? Who is also from Chicago, aren't you from here? Well, thank you for joining us and being here with you. And this is your first time in front of the Sunday Civics class, isn't it? Yes? Okay. Use it. This is your first time. And as a guest for the first time, I always ask my guests to share the story of your first civic action, the first time that you took civic action.
So when I was about 8, I wrote to Walgreens and I asked them to stop advertising back to school things in July because they were messing up our summer. I never heard back.
Wait, I think we have a representative from Walgreens here somewhere. We might have to tell them to go search the archives. But so you as a young person decided you messing up our summer, y'all.
And my daughter feels the same way now. I have a 13-year-old, and we were in Five Below the other day, and she said, "Why would they put this stuff out now? I don't want to see it." I said, "I understand. I tried."
You tried back in the day. You tried. Well, I thank you, and I thank you so much for joining us to be a part of this conversation. So, then a little later, we were talking to Rashad Robinson about his new book about power. And one of the other things that we didn't get to have a conversation about is how media shapes culture and shapes power. Is it not working? Okay, we'll switch back and forth. So one of the other things is how media impacts power and the betrayal of Black people, the betrayal of the diaspora, the betrayal of, as you talked about, motherhood and Black motherhood specifically. And you have built your career on writing and giving voice to different communities, particularly ours. Talk to us a bit about why it was important for you to focus on Black single mothers with this book.
So I've wanted to write, I've been a journalist, I've been a writer for a very long time. I wanted to write a book for a long time, and I couldn't drill down on a subject, right? I knew I wanted to talk about Black women and our experiences. I know I wanted to talk about the relationship between us and our men and us and our children. But I didn't want to write about Black single motherhood for a lot of reasons. Primarily because I knew that it would be hard to get people excited about that subject. And I ended up getting a big fancy book deal with a big publisher, and I am literally begging people to engage with this book. And so the struggles that I'm surprised I'm here. Because the institution, I'm kidding, because this one right here is always going to make sure that the right people are in the rooms they belong in, right? But the institutions that I've been a part of and worked for, and schools where I have relationships where I thought, oh, it's me. I've got this resume, I've got this book, they're going to have me come in, they're going to support it. And it hasn't been that way. You know, Black single mothers, I think, I went into this wanting to write a book to defend us, to explain us, to give context to people about who we are. People don't realize Black single mothers are foundational to our community, right? Going back to the plantation, there was a lot of women mothering. They weren't wives, right? They didn't have a co-parent. They didn't have that type of support system. There were children who needed to be taken care of. And there were Black women doing that labor. And that is how we have functioned in this country the entire time we've been here, without the resources and respect that we deserve. So I went into it wanting to stand up for us, and I came out of it radicalized. You know, I believe now that Black single mothers are the single most important group of people in our community, right? We are an institution, and we deserve institutional support.
So when you So when the reason why I wanted to talk to you was interesting because I was talking to someone about having you on, and they were like, well, what's the connection to civics? Because sometimes people pitch themselves to be on Sunday Civics. I had one pitch, June, you remember the car people? Yes. That they wanted to come on and talk about cars, and I was like, well, are you talking about how cars help expand participation? And he's just like, no, I own a dealership. And I was like, oh, okay. Are you coming to talk about Black dealership and how it's engaged in things? He was like, no, I just want to promote the dealership. And I was like, I don't, there's no civic angle from this standpoint. And so when I was talking to a friend and I was telling her that I was having you on, she was like, well, what's your civic angle? And I was like, oh, I can go down the list. And I was like, I could talk about how it is Black single mothers who are often an anchor in communities and not only raising their children, but raising other people's children, and in the NAACP and the church and the Urban League and leading, and how we need to focus priority on resources. I can also talk about how Black single mothers are often demonized and often the target of public policy. The reason why we have certain public policies is because of culture that is wrapped around demonization of single motherhood. So I wanted to have you talk a little bit about it in the book, about that public policy connection and about demonizing and the public narrative about single motherhood that often creates public policy unbeknownst to us.
I think at the root of much of the modern day contempt toward Black single mothers is the Moynihan Report, right, of 1969, where Daniel Patrick Moynihan prepares this report for the president, and he says, look, and he's a future senator, so this is somebody who touches policy, right? But he says, hey, Black people have had a really hard time because of racism. It's been very unfair to them. We can throw things at them. We can give them, accommodations and things of that sort. But nothing is going to change for them as a people until they address the matriarchal structure of their families. Right? He said Black men were undisciplined and needed to go to the military, and Black women needed to stop domineering their men and stop being heads of households. At that time, only 25% of Black households were led by single mothers. We're far past that now, right? But at every turn, we've been treated as if we're the enemy, right? So the face of welfare reform was us taking advantage of the system, right? When Ronald Reagan needed an anti-hero, right, to cast out and say, who's the bad guy, who's making things tough for us here? It's not the big businesses being greedy, it's not the politicians not serving us, it's poor Black women cheating the welfare system, having more babies that they can afford to feed, taking all this stuff away from us good Americans. And people have clung to that narrative, and even people in our own community have clung to that narrative, and we've supported policy at times that was not in our best interest, because we too believe that this awful caricature of a greedy Black woman who's living high off the hog. Now, if you've ever been on benefits, or on benefits now, or love somebody who's on government benefits, 9.99999 times out of 10, they're not living a soft life, right? The food stamps are generally not enough to keep everybody fed. But the idea that somehow giving us anything takes away from other people goes beyond just people's, messed up thoughts about us and becomes public policy.
One thing about reading your work overall, not just in Black Single Mother, but just knowing the breadth and the expansion of your work, is that, motherhood itself isn't just a private experience in this country. And we see that even with the legislation and targets on the state level or the national level in controlling women's bodies, women themselves are very physical being, and then certainly mothering, right? It's now this public thing that everybody has a right and a say to our bodies, to how we live our lives, to how we raise our children. It's like we give up a part of ourselves and then become able to be criticized and put on an auction block, if you will, as a mother. And you talk about that a little bit. And there was a particular point, and I don't have my note with me. There's a pinpoint I wrote in the book. I was like, I wish you would have went more here in talking specifically about it.
It's interesting, since becoming a mother, witnessing, not just politicians and preachers and activists, but community members who feel that they have this authority over mothers and really over women, right? So if you're not a mother, something's wrong with you. And if you are a mother and you're not a mother under this very specific set of circumstances, heterosexual, married, and middle class or up, something's wrong with you too, right? Like the other day I saw a guy on social media say that he, cut a woman off that he was dating because she said she didn't want to have children. She didn't want to put her body through that. And he said something along the lines of the self-involvement is through the roof here. And I'm like, Black women die related to childbirth at a higher rate than any other group of women in the country, at the level of so-called third world countries, if not worse. But the idea that a woman doesn't want to sign herself up for that is a dereliction of her duty, right? And a mother who wears booty shorts, or who has tattoos, or who isn't married, a mother who doesn't fit into this very narrow box that is so narrow that most of us do not fit. And many of us who do not fit, we still adhere to those principles. We are unkind to ourselves. And so part of the reason I wrote this book was to encourage Black single mothers to forgive themselves, to acknowledge the work that they're doing in spite of, potentially difficult circumstances, with the father of their children or no father of their children. But you are there. You are loving and you are caring, right? And so that's, the West doesn't respect motherhood, and that's not who we're from. We're from matrilineal societies, right? We're from places where mothers matter, childbirth matters, the time it takes you to rear a child matters, no matter how you came to care for a child. That service means that you are an important, revered part of the community, right? But that's something that, do we do it in pockets? Do we do it in some of our spaces? Yes. But the society that we live in outside of us, when we're in spaces like that, doesn't think of mothers in the way that we do.
You talk about wanting to write the book. It's deeply personal. You share a lot of your own experience. And you talk about wanting to do it to be a guide for basically a guide for you, right? For your own self. And as I mentioned, here in NAACP, you have a number of women who are mothering in different ways. You'd be surprised, and those of you who know me personally know I foster. You'd be surprised the amount of times that people say to me, "Oh, I mean regular mothers," and I'm like, "What do you mean regular mothers?" And they're like, because you didn't give birth to them." So, and I was like, "Okay, so what does that what does that mean, right?" But there are women mothering who are mothers, whether they be partners, whether they are single, whether they are in a new phase of life of their children are grown and now, they're living life in a different way. And they also, as you talk about being infrastructure in our communities, linchpins in our communities, they are also doing that mothering, doing that work, while also mothering and working in the complete community. And I just, can think about some of the women who may be here right now, right? That you are here, you are giving your time, your talent, and treasure in leading for and organizing in NAACP and caring for children and, caring in another space. What do you want them to get out of reading Black Single Mother, that NAACP chapter president, single mother who is working on injustice, also raising a young boy? What do you want them to read it? I know, but what do you want them to get from it?
I want them to feel affirmed. I want them to feel loved and respected. And, the book cover has flowers, and we did flowers because I'm giving Black single mothers our flowers, because nobody else seems willing to do this. So I want them to feel, appreciated, and to know that they're, whether their direct duty is is a mirror of the sort of love and affirmation they deserve or not, that there are people in this global Black diaspora who are cheering for them, who love them, and who are there.
Jamilah, what else? You have been, as I said, a writer and a culture critic for a long time. And one of the pieces that I wanted you to talk about is particularly, and you write about this a lot in different ways, how narratives and our culture influences our politics, influences what we are organizing around. And I saw a conversation online recently as we are seeing this increased attention on our young Black boys who are missing, who are physically harmed, who are discriminated against. And at the same time, we often have to push so hard to get focus on the young Black girls who are trafficked, who are facing sexual assault, who are disappearing from their communities as well. How does our culture impact that kind of work?
So actually, one of the things I talk about extensively in the book is the tragic belief amongst many of us that Black men, and not just Black people outside of our community believe this too, that Black men and boys are so disenfranchised and so much more disenfranchised than Black women and girls, right? They have it so much worse. The statistics are so much different, which is not true, right? Except for incarceration. That's also a gender thing. that Black women have the highest rate of incarceration of any group of women, right? But we're out of the conversations about mass incarceration entirely, right? I love the documentary 13th. I love the documentary 13th, but Black incarcerated women were not acknowledged at all, right? And so this idea that the men have it so bad that all that we can concentrate our energy on is addressing their issues. We don't have the time and energy for the girls, they're okay. And this is something that educators have admitted to, right? I did this when I was teaching. I was focused on the boys. Boys need me. Boys need me, right? And so they're so far worse off than us that not only do they need more attention, but we can't hold them accountable for the way they treat women and children. And so that has influenced our entertainment, right? That's influenced the narratives that are pushed through newspaper media and magazine media. Who gets coverage? You know, the other day, after Danny Glover revealed that he's living with dementia, I saw a Black woman say online, why do so many Black men suffer with dementia? And it's a valid question, but it's interesting because it implies that Black women don't. But Black women get dementia at a higher rate than any group of people, period. So this is why do Black people suffer with dementia? This is the us problem. But we're not used to thinking of things as us problems. It's the men, and when it comes to gender, it's white women who are the loudest voice. You know, and so I deeply want for us as we need to protect our boys. We must find justice for the ones that have been harmed or stolen, but we can't only censor our boys the way that we have for generations. You know, we've tried that. It doesn't work. There's no trickle down support that comes from them because we're pouring so much into them that now they're pouring into us. It don't work that way. So we have to be very specific about naming the issues that our women and girls are facing and naming the harms that men and boys cause women and that women and girls cause to men and boys.
Let's see, does this work? Oh, yeah, see that sound. Okay, so Jamilah, thank you so much for taking time and for being with us in this conversation. And, you know, I think it's important, just as the conversation with Rashad challenged us to think about, to step back, to stop a second and think about how we are defining power, how we are moving forward and strategizing for a better future. I thought it was important to pair that conversation here because it also prompts us to think about how we are reinforcing, even amongst ourselves. Even those of us who think we are the best at, ensuring parity and, to stop and think of the actions that I take, the people that I prop up, the things that I say, is it reinforcing, even at my own detriment of suppressing my own, needs and focus to focus on someone else, right? And not thinking about how we can change our culture in our community. I'm raising a young Black boy. I want to be able that you can tell the difference of the Black boy that will be a man shortly, that he will treat women in a different way, right? I want us who excused in the past how men behave. Oh, that's just men. That's just what they do. I don't want that to go on another generation, right? I don't want that to happen. And so we have to challenge how we are moving even amongst ourselves, what we are allowing to continue, and wish that somebody would have stepped in and changed when we were coming up, that we now have the ability to change that culture now. So tell us more about the book. How do we get it? How do we continue the conversation to continue the support?
So I understand you all are having a gala on Wednesday night, but if you're not going to that, my book signing is free. I will be actually signing books here tomorrow at 4:00. So you can get the book there. The Book Joint, which is a local Black woman-owned bookstore, is the vendor, and so she has my book there all the time. I'm doing a reading on Wednesday night at Call and Response Books in Hyde Park. Get the book wherever you want to get the book from. If you need to get it from Amazon, this is a judgment-free zone. But I just want you to don't, I feel like there's no bootlegging for books really in that way, but like I feel like I will have made it when I see my book on a table, like on 125th Street in Harlem or on 79th Street, spread out on a blanket. I'm like, I wrote that. But just please get it, share it with your friends and community and talk to people about it. Encourage people who are Black single mothers to pick it up. It's not a man-bashing book. I actually have an incredible relationship with my daughter's father, and I talk about how we made that happen. And I encourage that for people who can make that happen, but I also hold space for people who cannot. And so I interviewed 21 other Black single moms of various class backgrounds, ages, different parts of the country, including Tarana Burke from the Me Too movement and Michaela Angela Davis, who's a well-known cultural critic. And I talked to teen moms, I talked to a couple co-parenting moms, I talked to a lot of moms doing it all entirely by themselves. And there's really important things to say.
Jamilah, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us. Let's give Jamilah a round of applause. Thank you so much for coming to talk with us and sharing a wonderful story. It is, I know, incredibly difficult to put your personal out for the world to judge and to comment on, but I love you. And so anytime you think and you see somebody making negative comments, you can just be like, I don't care what you say, Joy love me. So thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part. Nubia, thank you so much for being a part. We are going to say goodbye to this live stream. If you have questions, Q&A, and you want to talk about what you are strategizing, what you are doing, we are going to continue that conversation offline here, but you can go to sundaycivics.org. Raise your hand if you have my Get Vote Ready journal, which, yes, thank you very much, which help you to prepare to get vote ready. Also, here, those of you who are here at the NAACP convention, you know that you had an opportunity to see the debut of our new civic toolbox items, our field kit, which helps you to help 25 people make a vote plan, as well as our Take Civic Action cards that help you take one action in one day into civic action. And that'll be debuting in the fall, and you'll be able to get all of that for those of you who are online. And Nubia, there is drop coming for you too soon. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for the live recording here at NAACP Convention. Thank you so much for continuing to listen to Sunday Civics on Sirius XM Urban View, channel 126. I know that Karen was listening. Say, hey, Karen. Thank you so much. And good night.